In the vast darkness between stars where empires rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a truth that few species dare to acknowledge. Humans are not the weakest link in the galactic chain, they are the wild card that no one saw coming. For centuries, the Galactic Coalition had dismissed Earth as a backwater planet filled with primitive beings barely capable of interstellar travel. They were wrong, catastrophically wrong, because when humanity finally revealed what they had been building in the shadows, when their ships decloaked for the first time in the heart of Coalition space, the universe learned a terrifying lesson about underestimating the species that crawled out of a death world and decided the stars weren't quite dangerous enough. This is the story of that revelation. This is the story of Stardust and blood, of miscalculations that shattered empires, and of the moment when humanity showed the galaxy what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. The Corvathians thought they were hunting prey. The bridge of the Corvathian dreadnought Crimson Talon hummed with the quiet confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Admiral Vexstar stood before the massive viewport, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he watched the swirling nebula that concealed their fleet. 47 warships, each one a testament to Corvathian military supremacy, waited in perfect formation for the signal to begin what would surely be the shortest war in galactic history. "Status report," Vexstar commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 17 star systems and never lost a single engagement. "All ships report ready, Admiral," replied his tactical officer, Zethmar. The younger Corvathian's enthusiasm was barely contained as he continued, "The human convoy should enter the tertiary system in approximately 6 standard hours. Intelligence confirms it's a civilian transport fleet. Food supplies, medical equipment, and colonization materials bound for their outer rim settlements." Vexstar's reptilian features curved into what might have been called a smile on a more pleasant species. 47 military vessels against a handful of merchant ships protected by what their databases claim are patrol craft. It almost seems unfair. The Coalition Council was clear in their directive, Zethmar reminded him. Humanity has been expanding too rapidly. Their settlement ships have been pushing into systems the hegemony considers strategically important. This demonstration will remind them of their place in the galactic hierarchy. The Admiral nodded slowly. It was a familiar pattern, one the Corvathian military had perfected over centuries, a show of overwhelming force against a weaker species, followed by negotiations that heavily favored the Coalition's interests. The humans would surrender their expansion rights, pay reparations, and likely offer up their more advanced technologies as tribute. It was efficient, bloodless, and profitable. "What do we know about human military capabilities?" Vexstar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Zethmar activated his datapad, scrolling through intelligence reports that painted a picture of galactic irrelevance. "Limited, Admiral. Their ships are primitive by our standards, chemical rockets and basic fusion drives. Their weapons appear to be kinetic projectiles and crude energy beams. Intelligence estimates their most advanced vessels are roughly equivalent to our courier ships in terms of technology. And their numbers? Minimal. Earth's military consists primarily of system defense platforms and a small fleet of what they call destroyers and frigates. Nothing larger than a light cruiser has been confirmed in their inventory. The patrol ships escorting this convoy are likely their most advanced units." Vexstar turned from the viewport, his cold eyes scanning the bridge crew. Each Corvathian officer wore the distinctive crimson and gold uniform of the Coalition Navy, their scales polished to mirror brightness, their weapons checked and ready. They were the finest military force in the galaxy, backed by technology that had crushed resistance across 1,000 worlds. "Very well. When the humans arrive, we will decloak and demand their immediate surrender. If they comply, we'll escort their convoy back to Coalition space for processing. If they resist," he paused, letting the implication hang in the recycled air, "we'll demonstrate why the Corvathian Empire has never lost a war." The bridge fell silent except for the steady rhythm of life support systems and the distant thrumming of the ship's massive reactor core. Through the viewport, the nebula continued its ancient dance, gas and dust swirling in patterns that had remained unchanged for millennia. It was beautiful in its way, a cosmic ballet that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Hours passed with mechanical precision. The crew maintained their stations, running final system checks and reviewing targeting protocols. The Crimson Talon sensors swept the surrounding space continuously, watching for the distinctive energy signatures that would herald the arrival of human vessels. Vexstar remained on the bridge, occasionally consulting with his department heads, but mostly content to wait with the patience of an apex predator. "Contact!" announced the sensor officer, suddenly breaking the quiet tension. Multiple vessels emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Configuration matches expected human convoy formation. Vexstar straightened, his predatory instincts sharpening. Numbers and classifications? 12 vessels, Admiral, 8 large cargo haulers, 2 passenger transports, and 2 escort vessels matching the profile of human patrol craft. Excellent. Signal the fleet. Prepare to decloak on my command. Tactical, I want targeting solutions on all vessels, but hold fire unless I give explicit orders. Communications, prepare the standard surrender demand. The bridge erupted into controlled activity as officers carried out their orders. Weapons systems powered up with the distinctive whine of charging energy banks. Shield generators hummed to life, creating invisible barriers capable of deflecting anything the humans might throw at them. The Crimson Talon and her sister ships were technological marvels, each one capable of reducing a planet to ash. "All ships report ready," Zethmar announced. "Fleet deployment optimal for maximum intimidation factor. Human convoy is maintaining course and speed," the sensor officer added. "No indication they've detected our presence." Vexstar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The cloaking fields generated by Corvathian stealth technology were virtually undetectable by primitive human sensors. The convoy was flying straight into a trap they couldn't possibly escape. In minutes, this would be over, and humanity would learn the cost of defying the natural order of galactic civilization. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving standard merchant traffic communications from the convoy. They appear to be following normal shipping protocols, discussing cargo manifests and arrival schedules."
"Of course they are," Vexstar replied.
"They have no idea what's waiting for them. Signal the fleet. Decloak in 30 seconds." The countdown began with military precision. Vexstar watched the human convoy grow larger on the main display, their ships moving with the steady, predictable course of civilian vessels focused entirely on their commercial mission. The cargo haulers were massive but ungainly, clearly designed for capacity rather than combat. The passenger transports were sleek but obviously unarmed. Even the escort vessels looked laughably inadequate, small craft that might have been dangerous to pirates but would be utterly helpless against a single Corvathian destroyer, let alone an entire fleet. 10 seconds, Zethmar announced. Vexstar straightened his uniform and prepared to address the human convoy commanders. The words were familiar. He had delivered similar ultimatums to dozens of species over his long career. Surrender or face annihilation. Submit to coalition authority or watch your vessels become expanding clouds of superheated plasma. It was always the same, and it always worked. Decloak now. Space erupted in brilliant flashes of light as 47 Corvathian warships materialized around the human convoy like predators emerging from tall grass. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming, a carefully orchestrated display of military might that left no doubt about the outcome of any potential conflict. Dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, destroyers, and frigates arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around the merchant vessels, weapons trained and ready to fire. For a moment, the only sound on the bridge was the soft hum of electronics and the distant whisper of air recycling systems. Then the communications officer looked up from his station with a puzzled expression. "Admiral, the human ships, they're not responding to our hails." "What do you mean, not responding?" "I mean they're not answering at all, sir. No emergency transmissions, no surrender requests, no panic signals. They're just continuing on their course as if we're not here." Vexstar frowned. This was unusual. Every other species had reacted immediately to the sight of a Corvathian battle fleet, usually with terrified surrender transmissions flooding all communication channels. The silence from the human convoy was unsettling, though he supposed it might be shock or disbelief. "Sensor readings on the escort vessels?" he asked. "Still just 2 small craft, Admiral. Their weapons remain powered down, shields inactive. If anything, they seem to be moving to better protect the civilian ships, but they're not taking any offensive action." "Very well. Open a channel on all frequencies. Let's make our intentions perfectly clear." The main screen flickered to life, showing Vexstar's imposing figure in full military regalia. His message would be broadcast to every human vessel simultaneously, ensuring there could be no confusion about the situation they faced. "Human vessels, this is Admiral Vexstar of the Corvathian Imperial Navy. You have entered space claimed by the galactic hegemony without proper authorization. Your expansion into this sector violates established territorial agreements. You will immediately cut your engines, prepare to be boarded, and submit to Coalition authority for processing. You have 60 seconds to comply before we open fire." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. 60 seconds stretched like hours as the crew waited for the inevitable response. But as the countdown reached 0, the human convoy continued its steady course, showing no signs of compliance or even acknowledgement. "Still no response, Admiral," the communications officer reported, his voice betraying the first hints of unease. "Are our transmissions reaching them?" "Yes, sir. All indicators show successful delivery on multiple frequencies." "They're definitely receiving our signals." Vexstar's frown deepened. This was beyond unusual. It was unprecedented. No species in recorded galactic history had simply ignored a Corvathian ultimatum. Even the most warlike races had at least responded with defiance or threats. This absolute silence was disturbing. "Tactical analysis of the escort vessels," he ordered. Zethmar consulted his displays, running detailed scans of the 2 human warships. Both vessels appear to be maintaining standard patrol configuration. No additional weapon systems detected, no unusual energy readings, no signs of advanced technology beyond our initial assessment. They're exactly what they appear to be. Small escort craft with minimal offensive capability. And the cargo vessels? Confirmed civilian configuration, multiple compartments consistent with freight storage, passenger accommodations, and life support systems. No hidden weapons, no unusual power signatures. These are definitely merchant ships, Admiral. Vexstar felt a cold knot forming in his stomach, though he couldn't quite identify why. Everything about this situation matched their intelligence projections perfectly. The human convoy was exactly what it appeared to be, a collection of civilian vessels with minimal protection, completely outgunned and outnumbered by his fleet. They should have surrendered by now, or at least attempted some form of communication. The continued silence suggested either incredible stupidity or... He pushed the thought away. There was no or. Humans were a primitive species with limited technology and no understanding of galactic military realities. Their silence was probably shock, or perhaps their communication systems were more primitive than anticipated. There was no need for paranoia. "Signal the fleet," he commanded. "Prepare for a demonstration of firepower. Target the largest cargo hauler with minimum force, just enough to disable their engines and get their attention." "Yes, Admiral. Targeting solutions locked. Fire!" A single beam of coherent energy lanced out from the Crimson Talon's secondary batteries, designed to cripple rather than destroy. It should have been a precision strike that would disable the human ship's propulsion systems while leaving the crew and cargo intact, a clear demonstration of Corvathian capabilities without unnecessary loss of life. Instead, the beam struck what appeared to be empty space 3 meters in front of the cargo hauler's hull and dissipated harmlessly against an invisible barrier that blazed briefly with absorbed energy before fading back to transparency. The bridge fell silent as every Corvathian officer stared at the sensor readings in disbelief. "Report," Vexstar said quietly, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. "Sir," the tactical officer stammered, The human vessel appears to have deflector shields. Advanced deflector shields. The power curve suggests technology at least equal to our own defensive systems. That's impossible. Our intelligence. Admiral, the sensor officer interrupted, his voice rising with alarm. I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human convoy. All vessels, including the cargo haulers, are showing power signatures consistent with military-grade reactors coming online. Vexstar stared at the display as warning lights began flashing across his tactical board. The peaceful merchant convoy was transforming before his eyes, energy readings climbing to levels that shouldn't have been possible for civilian vessels. But even more disturbing was what happened next. The largest cargo hauler, the same ship they had just fired upon, began to change. What had appeared to be a simple freight container configuration was shifting, unfolding, revealing the true shape hidden beneath. Armor plating slid back to expose weapon ports. Sensor arrays deployed from concealed housings. Launch bays opened to reveal rows of fighter craft that had somehow been hidden from their scans. It wasn't a cargo hauler at all. It was a warship. A very large, very advanced warship that had been disguised as a civilian vessel. Admiral, Sefmar whispered, his scales pale with shock. The humans were never merchants. As if triggered by their discovery, space around the Corvathian fleet suddenly shimmered. The empty void that had seemed clear only moments before now revealed additional ships, dozens of them, materializing as their cloaking fields deactivated. Human vessels appeared from every direction, surrounding the Corvathian formation with the same tactical precision that Vexstar had used countless times before. But these weren't the primitive craft described in their intelligence reports. These were sleek, dangerous-looking warships bristling with weapons that sensors couldn't properly identify. Their hull configurations were unlike anything in the galactic database, suggesting design philosophies and technologies that had developed in complete isolation from known civilization. How many ships? Vexstar demanded, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his veins. Still counting, sir. At least 60 vessels, possibly more. They were using some form of stealth technology we can't identify. The Admiral stared at the tactical display as red icons continued to appear, marking hostile contacts in every direction. The Corvathian fleet, which had seemed overwhelmingly superior just minutes ago, was now outnumbered and surrounded by an enemy they had completely underestimated. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Vexstar found himself on the wrong side of a perfectly executed ambush, and somewhere in the depths of space, human commanders who had been planning this moment for far longer than anyone realized were finally ready to show the galaxy what happened when you underestimated Earth's children. The bridge of the human vessel Defiance was a study in controlled tension. Unlike the ornate displays of Corvathian military might, the human command center was functional, efficient, and designed for one purpose, winning wars that others thought unwinnable. Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the central tactical station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed the positions of both fleets in perfect detail. All Wraith Squadron vessels report successful decloak, announced Commander Torres from the communications station. Corvathian fleet is fully surrounded and has nowhere to run. Chen nodded grimly. 3 years of planning, 6 months of careful positioning, and 18 hours of holding absolutely still while the enemy walked into their trap had led to this moment. The Corvathians had expected to find frightened merchants. Instead, they had discovered Task Force Retribution, humanity's most advanced military formation and their first introduction to what human engineering could accomplish when survival was the only acceptable outcome. "What's our count on enemy vessels?" Chen asked. 47 confirmed hostiles, replied Lieutenant Commander Jackson from the tactical station. Mix of dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, and escort vessels. Heavy armor, advanced shielding, weapons that could probably crack a moon in half. And our forces? 63 ships in the immediate area, with another 27 holding position at the hyperspace limit. Full spectrum of vessel types from the Defiance down to our Viper-class interceptors. All ships report ready for combat operations. Chen allowed herself a small smile. The numbers were important, but what really mattered was what those numbers represented. Every human vessel in the task force incorporated technology that had been developed in absolute secrecy over the past 2 decades. While the galaxy had been dismissing humanity as primitive backwater colonists, Earth's brightest minds had been solving problems that other species considered impossible. Torres announced, "Admiral Vexstar is requesting immediate communication. Put him through. Let's see what the Great Conqueror has to say when he's the one looking down gun barrels." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the scaled features of the Corvathian commander. His earlier confidence had been replaced by barely controlled fury, though Chen could see the calculation behind his reptilian eyes. Vexstar was a career military officer facing a situation that threatened everything he thought he knew about galactic warfare. "Human Commander," he began, his voice tight with restraint.
"I am Admiral Vexstar of the Corvathian Imperial Navy. You are interfering with a lawful coalition enforcement action."
"Stand down immediately and we will consider reducing the charges against you." Chen almost laughed. Even surrounded and outgunned, the alien admiral was trying to project authority he no longer possessed. It was exactly the kind of arrogance that had made this ambush possible in the first place. "Admiral Vexstar," she replied, her voice carrying the cold professionalism that had earned her command of humanity's most dangerous military formation. "I'm Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding Task Force Retribution. You seem to be under the impression that you're still in charge of this situation. Let me correct that misunderstanding." She gestured to Jackson, who activated a comprehensive tactical display showing the positions of all human vessels. Red targeting brackets appeared around each Corvathian ship, indicating that every enemy vessel was already locked in someone's crosshairs. "Your fleet is surrounded, outgunned, and completely at our mercy," Chen continued. "You have exactly one opportunity to avoid turning this into the shortest battle in Corvathian history. You will order your ships to power down their weapons, drop their shields, and prepare to be boarded. Any aggressive action will result in the immediate destruction of your entire fleet." Vexstar's scales darkened with rage. "You dare threaten the Corvathian Empire? We have conquered 17 star systems. Our military might is legendary across the galaxy. You are nothing but primitive apes playing with technology you barely understand." Chen's expression didn't change, but Jackson caught the slight tightening around her eyes that meant someone was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating human capabilities. "Commander Jackson," she said quietly, "please demonstrate our primitive technology to the Admiral. Target the Corvathian destroyer on our starboard flank. Disable only. We're not savages." "Aye, Admiral." Phoenix cannon charging. The Defiance had been designed around a single revolutionary weapon system that represented humanity's answer to superior alien technology. While other species had focused on incremental improvements to existing energy weapons, human engineers had asked a different question. What if we didn't try to match their technology? What if we made something completely different? The Phoenix cannon was the result of that thinking. A weapon that converted matter directly into energy through controlled antimatter reactions, then focused that energy through crystalline matrices that existed only in theoretical physics papers until human scientists figured out how to manufacture them. The result was a directed energy weapon that could punch through any known shielding system and deliver precisely controlled amounts of destruction. "Firing now!" Jackson announced. A beam of brilliant white light connected the Defiance to the Corvathian destroyer for exactly 1.3 seconds. When the light faded, the enemy vessel was still intact but completely helpless, its engines dead, its weapons offline, and its shields flickering weakly as emergency power struggled to maintain basic life support. The bridge of the Defiance was silent as Vexstar stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. The targeted destroyer had been one of his most advanced vessels, protected by military-grade shields that should have been able to withstand anything a primitive human weapon could produce. Instead, it had been disabled with surgical precision that spoke of technology beyond his understanding. "How?" he whispered, more to himself than to Chen. "You've been operating under some fundamental misconceptions, Admiral," Chen replied. You assumed that because humanity came late to the galactic community, we must be inferior. You assumed that because we seemed to have limited technology, we were incapable of innovation. Most importantly, you assumed that 20 years of apparent stagnation meant we were standing still. She leaned forward in her command chair, her gray eyes reflecting the steel that had driven humanity from the caves of Earth to the stars beyond. We weren't standing still, Admiral. We were learning. Every piece of technology the Coalition shared with us, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange, it all taught us something about how the galaxy really works. And what we learned was that everyone was so focused on improving existing technology that nobody was asking whether there might be better ways to solve the same problems. Jackson's tactical display updated to show detailed scans of the disabled Corvathian destroyer. The data revealed something that made Vextar's blood run cold. The human weapon had somehow bypassed his ship's shields entirely, targeting specific systems with an energy type that Corvathian sensors couldn't properly identify. Your intelligence was correct about human technology, Chen continued. For the first decade of contact, we really were using primitive chemical rockets and basic fusion drives, but you made the mistake of assuming that represented our capabilities rather than our starting point. Torres looked up from his communication station. Admiral, we're receiving surrender signals from 12 Corvathian vessels. Their commanders are requesting clarification on our terms. Chen nodded approvingly. At least some of the enemy officers were smart enough to recognize a hopeless situation when they saw one. But she noticed that Vextar's flagship was not among the vessels signaling surrender. Admiral Vextar, she said, returning her attention to the main screen, your subordinates are showing more wisdom than their commander. This is your last chance to end this peacefully. Order your fleet to stand down, or I'll be forced to demonstrate what happens when humans stop being polite. Never, Vextar snarled. The Corvathian Empire does not surrender to inferior species. All ships, open fire! Show these primitives the power of... His transmission cut off abruptly as the Defiance's communication systems blocked the Corvathian command frequencies. Chen had anticipated this exact response. Career military officers like Vextar would rather die fighting than admit they had been outmaneuvered by a species they considered beneath them. Jam all Corvathian communications, she ordered. Prevent Vextar from coordinating his fleet. Tactical, execute Scenario 7. Disable as many enemy vessels as possible while minimizing casualties. Aye, Admiral. All ships acknowledge Scenario 7. Commencing precision strikes. The battle that followed would have been impossible under conventional military doctrine. Human vessels moved through space with an agility that seemed to defy physics, their maneuvering systems incorporating gravitational manipulation technology that made them appear to dance between enemy fire. At the same time, their weapons displayed accuracy and power that turned what should have been a chaotic firefight into a methodical dismantling of Corvathian military capability. The first wave of human attacks targeted enemy weapon systems exclusively. Phoenix cannon beams and particle lance strikes disabled turrets and launch bays with surgical precision, leaving Corvathian ships intact but harmless. The few enemy vessels that managed to return fire discovered that human defensive systems were even more revolutionary than their weapons. Instead of traditional energy shields, human ships used something called reflex defense networks, millions of tiny drones that formed protective clouds around each vessel. Enemy fire was intercepted, absorbed, or redirected by swarms of micromachines that could adapt their defensive patterns in real time. Energy beams were dispersed across thousands of tiny surfaces. Kinetic projectiles were caught and redirected. Even direct hits seemed to have minimal effect on the strange human vessels. Corvathian casualty report, Jackson called out as the one-sided battle continued. 17 vessels completely disabled, 12 others with severe damage to weapons and propulsion. Enemy casualties appear minimal. Most ships are venting atmosphere but maintaining life support. Chen nodded approvingly. The tactical doctrine for Operation Retribution had been clear: demonstrate overwhelming superiority while minimizing loss of life. Dead enemies couldn't carry messages back to their superiors, and humanity needed the galaxy to understand exactly what they were dealing with. Status of the enemy flagship? The Crimson Talon is still maneuvering and returning fire, but they've lost most of their main weapons. Admiral Vexstar appears to be attempting some kind of ramming attack. Chen watched the tactical display as the massive Corvathian dreadnought turned toward the nearest human vessel, the destroyer Vindication, and accelerated to attack speed. It was a desperate move that revealed just how completely Vexstar had lost control of the situation. "Signal the Vindication," she ordered. "Authorization for Maneuver 12. Aye, Admiral." Vindication acknowledges. What happened next would have been impossible for any known military technology. As the Corvathian dreadnought closed to ramming distance, the human destroyer simply disappeared. Not cloaked, not destroyed, gone, as if it had never existed. The Crimson Talon passed harmlessly through empty space while her crew stared at sensor readings that insisted they had just rammed a ship that was no longer there. The Vindication reappeared 3 seconds later directly behind the Corvathian flagship and fired a single precision shot that disabled the dreadnought's main reactor. The massive enemy vessel went dark, leaving only emergency power and the fading glow of cooling metal. "Dimensional phase technology," Torres explained quietly, watching Vexstar's shocked expression on the main screen. "We borrowed the concept from theoretical physics papers published by the Etherian Academy 50 years ago. They proved it was impossible, so we figured it was worth investigating." The battle was over. 47 Corvathian vessels hung dead in space, their crews alive but completely helpless. The human fleet maintained perfect formation around their prisoners, weapons trained and ready but no longer needed. In less than 30 minutes, Task Force Retribution had accomplished what should have been impossible, the complete defeat of a superior enemy force without losing a single ship. Chen re-established communication with the Corvathian flagship, where emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the bridge. Vexstar stood among the ruins of his command center, his uniform torn and his scales bearing the cuts of flying debris. But his eyes still burned with defiant pride. "Admiral Vexstar," Chen said formally, "your fleet has been defeated and disabled. I'm prepared to accept your surrender and arrange for the safe transfer of your crews to Coalition space. This doesn't have to become a massacre. You have won this engagement," Vexstar replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion and shame. "But you have also declared war on the entire galactic coalition. 67 species will unite against you. Thousands of ships will hunt you across the galaxy. You may have superior technology, but you cannot defeat the combined might of civilized space." Chen's expression remained neutral, but inside she felt a cold satisfaction. The Admiral had just given her the opening she needed to deliver the message that would change everything. "Admiral, you're operating under another misconception. This wasn't a declaration of war, it was a demonstration. For the past 20 years, humanity has been watching, learning, and preparing. We know about every coalition fleet movement, every military base, every strategic weakness. We've had ships observing every major system in your empire, and you never even knew we were there." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "The galaxy is about to learn that humans don't declare war, Admiral. We don't send ultimatums or make threats. When we decide that a species has become a problem, we simply solve it. The only reason your fleet is still breathing is that we wanted the Coalition to receive a very specific message." Vexstar's eyes widened as he began to understand the true scope of what he was facing. "Your people have been so focused on maintaining control over primitive species that you forgot to ask what happens when one of those species stops being primitive. Earth's children don't want your empire, Admiral. We don't want your planets or your trade routes or your political authority. What we want is for the galaxy to understand that humanity is no longer accepting requests to know our place." The transmission ended, leaving the defeated Corvathian commander alone with the knowledge that his species had just made the worst mistake in their long history of conquest. And in the depths of space, human ships that had been waiting in silence for decades began moving toward their next objectives. The emergency session of the Galactic Coalition Council convened in chaos. Representatives from 67 member species filled the massive amphitheater on the neutral world of Centrum Prime, their various forms of agitation creating a cacophony of clicks, growls, harmonics, and translated speech that threatened to overwhelm the universal translation systems. At the center of the circular chamber, the holographic display showed tactical recordings from Admiral Vextar's fleet, footage that should have been impossible but was undeniably real. High Chancellor Mortak of the Etherian hierarchy called for order with the resonant psychic pulse that served his species as both voice and authority. The chamber gradually quieted, though the tension remained palpable as dozens of species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in shock and fear. Fellow delegates, Morthak began, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lighting into prismatic patterns. We have witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. The human species, previously classified as a minor technological civilization, has demonstrated military capabilities that exceed our most advanced projections. The Corvathian representative, General Kethvar, rose from his delegation's platform with visible effort. His scales bore the stress patterns of a military officer who had received reports that contradicted everything he thought he knew about warfare. "High Chancellor, honorable delegates," he said, his voice carrying the weight of species-wide humiliation. "Admiral Vextar's tactical logs have been verified by independent analysis. The human fleet demonstrated technology that appears to violate known physical laws. They achieved instantaneous matter-to-energy conversion, gravitational manipulation beyond our theoretical models, and what can only be described as controlled dimensional phasing." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembly. The Zephyrian delegates' tentacles writhed in patterns that indicated extreme agitation, while the silicon-based crystalline collective representatives resonated with harmonic frequencies that suggested they were rapidly recalculating threat assessments. More disturbing, Kethvar continued, is the implication that humanity has been conducting covert surveillance operations throughout Coalition space for years, possibly decades. Our intelligence services had no indication that Earth possessed the capability to project force beyond their home system, yet they somehow positioned a full battle fleet in the tertiary system without detection. The delegate from the Arachnid Confederacy, a species that had built their entire civilization around information gathering, clicked in rapid-fire patterns that the translation systems rendered as barely contained panic. If the humans have been watching us without our knowledge, what else do they know? Our fleet positions, our strategic reserves, our defensive capabilities, all of it may be compromised. High Chancellor Mortak projected calming harmonics, though his own crystalline structure flickered with stress patterns. The Etherian hierarchy had been the primary architects of galactic peace for 3 centuries, using their psychic abilities to mediate between aggressive species and maintain the delicate balance of power that kept the coalition functional. But psychic abilities were useless against an enemy that no one had thought to monitor. "Delegate Yarseth of the Vorthan Empire," he announced formally, "you have requested to address the council." The Vorthan representative rose slowly, her forearms manipulating holographic controls that brought up detailed analysis charts. The Vorthans were known throughout the galaxy as master strategists and military theorists. If they were concerned, everyone else should be terrified. "Honorable delegates," Yarseth began, her voice synthesized through mechanical implants that replaced the vocal cords her species had never evolved, "our war colleges have conducted preliminary analysis of the human combat footage. The tactical patterns displayed suggest military doctrine developed in complete isolation from galactic conventional wisdom." She gestured to the holographic display, which showed frame-by-frame breakdowns of human ship movements during the battle. "Notice how their vessels maneuver. They ignore established formations, coordinate through communication methods we cannot detect, and employ weapons that target specific subsystems rather than attempting to destroy enemy ships entirely. This is not the behavior of a species that learned warfare from galactic examples. This is indigenous military development that reached conclusions different from our own. The implications hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. Every species in the coalition had developed their military strategies through contact with other civilizations, adapting and improving on established patterns of warfare. The humans appeared to have started from scratch and arrived at solutions that rendered conventional military wisdom obsolete. Furthermore, Yarseth continued, the precision of their attacks suggests detailed knowledge of Korvathian ship designs, shield frequencies, and structural vulnerabilities. This level of intelligence could only be gathered through extensive covert operations conducted over years of observation. High Chancellor Mortak felt the psychic emanations of fear and confusion radiating from the assembled delegates. The coalition had maintained peace not through friendship but through careful balance of power, ensuring that no single species or alliance could threaten the stability of galactic civilization. The sudden emergence of humanity as a major military force had shattered that balance completely. What are Earth's current territorial claims, he asked. Though he suspected, he already knew the answer would be disturbing. The Terran Colonial Authority representative, Ambassador Elena Vasquez, had been sitting quietly throughout the session. She was human but had been considered a minor diplomatic figure representing a species with limited expansion capabilities. Now, as every delegate in the chamber turned to stare at her, she carried the weight of representing something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Earth makes no territorial claims beyond our established colonies, she replied calmly. We have no interest in conquering other species or seizing resources that belong to coalition members. Then what do you want? Demanded the Korvathian general. Your fleet could have destroyed Admiral Vextar's entire force, but you chose to disable them instead. You demonstrated overwhelming superiority, then released our ships and crews. What is humanity's objective? Ambassador Vasquez stood slowly, her simple dress uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate military regalia and exotic biological forms surrounding her. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone representing a species that no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. General Kethvar, honorable delegates, humanity's objective is very simple. We want to be left alone. For 20 years, the Coalition has treated Earth as a client state, demanding compliance with laws we had no role in creating, restricting our expansion into empty systems and generally expecting us to accept the role of junior partners in a galactic community we never asked to join. She activated her own holographic controls, displaying star charts that showed human colonies and the expansion restrictions that have been placed on them by Coalition treaty. These limitations were imposed when you believed humanity was technologically inferior and militarily insignificant. That assessment was incorrect. We accepted those restrictions because we were buying time to develop the capabilities you just witnessed. Now that development is complete, and we're informing the Coalition that previous agreements are no longer acceptable.
The chamber erupted in outraged protests from multiple species.
The concept of a junior member unilaterally rejecting Coalition authority was unprecedented and threatened the entire foundation of galactic governance. High Chancellor Morthak projected authoritative harmonics that gradually restored order. Ambassador Vasquez, the Coalition cannot allow member species to simply ignore established treaties based on technological advancement. Such precedent would destabilize, High Chancellor Vasquez interrupted politely. Humanity is not a member species rejecting Coalition authority. We are an independent civilization informing the galaxy that we never accepted your authority in the first place. Earth signed trade agreements and mutual defense pacts, not surrender documents. She manipulated the holographic display again, bringing up legal documents that few delegates had bothered to read carefully when they were originally negotiated. If you examine the actual treaties rather than your assumptions about their content, you'll discover that Earth retained full sovereignty over our internal affairs and expansion rights. We agreed to avoid systems claimed by other species and to participate in galactic commerce. Nothing more. The restrictions you've been imposing have no legal foundation. Delegate Yarseth of the Vorthan Empire studied the legal documents with the analytical precision her species was famous for. After several minutes of silence, she made a sound that the translation systems rendered as frustrated acknowledgement. The humans are correct. The original treaties contain sovereignty clauses that we dismissed as irrelevant given their apparent technological limitations. Legally, they have the right to withdraw from any agreement they consider disadvantageous. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. The coalition had become accustomed to managing primitive species through a combination of economic incentives and implied military threats. The legal framework existed to handle disputes between roughly equal civilizations, but it had never been tested by a species that had hidden their true capabilities while building up overwhelming technological superiority. "This is unacceptable," declared the hegemony representative. "If every species can develop secret weapons and then reject established agreements, galactic civilization will collapse into chaos." Ambassador Vasquez smiled, an expression that suddenly seemed far more dangerous than diplomatic. "Delegate Zarthul, you're describing exactly what humanity expects will happen. The coalition has maintained order through superior force and economic coercion. Now that we've demonstrated that Earth can match or exceed your military capabilities, the natural result will be an arms race as every species scrambles to develop countermeasures to human technology." She paused, allowing the implications to sink in among delegates who were beginning to understand the true scope of the crisis they faced. However, humanity has a proposal that might avoid that outcome. High Chancellor Morthak felt hope and suspicion emanating from the assembled representatives in roughly equal measure. What proposal? Complete reorganization of the coalition based on actual equality rather than technological hierarchy. No more restrictions on expansion into unclaimed systems. No more economic treaties that favor established powers. No more military interventions to maintain order by suppressing species that aren't strong enough to resist.
"And if the coalition refuses?" asked General Kethvar.
"Then humanity withdraws from galactic civilization entirely. We'll maintain our existing colonies, defend our territory from any aggression, and develop our technology without sharing the benefits with species that consider us inferiors. Within 50 years, we'll be so far ahead of current galactic standards that this conversation will seem quaint." The threat was delivered in the same calm diplomatic tone that Ambassador Vasquez had maintained throughout the session, but every delegate understood the implications. Humanity had proven they could advance their technology faster than the rest of the galaxy combined. 50 years of isolated development might produce capabilities that made their current advantages seem primitive by comparison. "There is a third option," Vasquez continued, "full partnership in technological development. Humanity shares our innovations with coalition members who agree to treat Earth as an equal partner rather than a client state. We work together to advance galactic civilization instead of competing to dominate it." High Chancellor Morthak projected contemplative harmonics while his crystalline structure flickered through colors that indicated rapid calculation. The Etherian hierarchy had survived for millennia by adapting to changing circumstances rather than trying to maintain control through force. If the humans were genuinely offering partnership instead of conquest, it might be the best possible outcome from a situation that could easily lead to galactic war. Ambassador Vasquez, assuming the coalition agrees to consider your proposal, what assurances can Earth provide that humanity won't use their technological advantages to dominate other species?
"The same assurances the coalition provided when it was established, High Chancellor."
Mutual defense treaties, economic cooperation agreements, and the understanding that any species attempting to conquer others will face the combined resistance of everyone else. The only difference is that humanity will be an equal partner in maintaining galactic stability rather than a subject expected to submit to decisions made by others. The chamber fell silent as delegates contemplated a future where the balance of power had shifted so dramatically that their previous assumptions about galactic civilization no longer applied. Some species saw opportunity in partnership with technologically advanced humans. Others saw only the end of their historical advantages over less developed worlds. "The Coalition Council will require time to consider these proposals," Morthak announced formally. "This session is adjourned pending consultation with member governments." As delegates began filing out of the chamber, many continued studying the tactical footage that showed human ships performing impossible maneuvers and wielding weapons that violated known physics. The galaxy had awakened to discover that one of its least significant members had become its most dangerous power. But perhaps more importantly, they had learned that humanity had been watching them all along, learning their weaknesses and preparing for exactly this moment. The question now was whether the galaxy would adapt to the new reality or cling to old assumptions until human patience finally ran out. In the depths of space, Task Force Retribution continued its patrol of the tertiary system, a not-so-subtle reminder that Earth's children were no longer hiding their capabilities. And in systems throughout Coalition space, other human ships that had been observing in silence for decades waited for orders that would determine whether humanity's emergence as a galactic power would lead to partnership or war. The age of underestimating Earth was over. The age of consequences was just beginning. 3 months after the Coalition Council's emergency session, the galaxy teetered on the edge of an abyss that no one had seen coming. What should have been a period of diplomatic negotiation and careful treaty revision had instead become a race toward destruction, driven by fear, pride, and the fundamental inability of established powers to accept that the cosmic order had changed forever. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the human dreadnought Sovereignty, watching the swirling patterns of hyperspace that concealed the largest military fleet humanity had ever assembled. 237 ships from Task Forces Retribution, Liberation, and Defiance hung in formation around her flagship, their crews preparing for a battle that would determine whether Earth's children would claim their place among the stars or die trying. Admiral Commander Torres announced through the ship's internal communication system, "We're receiving priority signals from Earth Command. President Harrison is requesting immediate conference." Chen nodded to her aide and made her way to the secure communication chamber deep within the Sovereignty's armored hull. The past 3 months had aged her more than the previous decade of military service, as she watched humanity's attempt at peaceful emergence collapse under the weight of galactic politics and species-wide paranoia. The holographic projection of President Marcus Harrison materialized. Earth's leader looked haggard, his gray hair disheveled and his eyes bearing the strain of someone who had watched careful plans unravel despite his best efforts. "Admiral," he began without preamble, "the Coalition has made their final decision." Ambassador Vasquez transmitted the official response 20 minutes ago. Chen felt her stomach tighten. "What's the verdict?" "Complete rejection of our proposals." The Coalition Council voted 63-4 to demand that humanity surrender all advanced military technology to joint galactic oversight, submit to permanent monitoring of our technological development, and accept territorial restrictions that would confine us to our current systems. "In other words," Chen said grimly, "they want us to become a client state with fancy weapons, under permanent supervision to ensure we never threaten their authority again. That's exactly what they want. And Admiral, there's more." Intelligence confirms that 37 Coalition species have formed what they're calling the Stability Alliance. They've been secretly coordinating military preparations for the past 8 weeks. Our surveillance assets report massive fleet buildups in 17 systems. Chen closed her eyes and ran through tactical calculations that she had hoped never to need. The Coalition's response was predictable but catastrophic. Instead of adapting to the new reality, they were preparing to crush humanity before Earth could become even more dangerous. What are we looking at in terms of numbers? Conservative estimates suggest the Alliance can field over 3,000 warships of various classes. Our intelligence indicates they're planning a coordinated assault on Earth and all human colonies simultaneously, designed to end the crisis through overwhelming force. The numbers were staggering. Humanity's total military fleet consisted of fewer than 500 ships, though each one incorporated technology that gave them advantages over conventional vessels. But even superior technology had limits when facing 6-to-1 odds across multiple theaters of operation. How long do we have? Alliance fleets are moving into position now. Our analysts believe they'll be ready to launch coordinated attacks within 72 hours. Chen opened her eyes and stared at the holographic representation of the man who had tried so hard to avoid this exact scenario. President Harrison had spent months attempting to negotiate a peaceful solution, offering technological partnership and economic cooperation in exchange for simple recognition of human sovereignty. The galaxy's answer was an ultimatum demanding submission or annihilation. Mr. President, I assume you've reached a decision about our response. Harrison's expression hardened with the resolve that had carried humanity from the caves of Earth to the stars beyond. Admiral, you are hereby authorized to implement Operation Starfall. All human military assets are released for unrestricted combat operations against coalition forces. The only limitations are the protection of civilian populations and the preservation of inhabited worlds. Chen felt a cold satisfaction settle over her like armor. Operation Starfall was humanity's ultimate contingency plan, the complete abandonment of defensive strategy in favor of an aggressive campaign designed to cripple the coalition's ability to coordinate large-scale military operations. It was desperate, dangerous, and entirely necessary given the circumstances they faced. Understood, Mr. Curvey. President, what about the diplomatic situation? Ambassador Vasquez has been recalled to Earth. All formal diplomatic relations with coalition species are terminated as of this conversation. From now on, humanity communicates through actions rather than words. The transmission ended, leaving Chen alone with the weight of knowing that she was about to lead humanity into a war that would either establish Earth as a galactic power or result in the species' extinction. There was no middle ground. The coalition's ultimatum had eliminated any possibility of compromise. She returned to the bridge of the Sovereignty, where her senior staff was already assembling in response to General Quarters alerts that had been sounding throughout the task force. The human fleet was preparing for combat with the methodical efficiency that had become their trademark. Status report, Chen ordered as she took her command chair. All ships report ready for combat operations, replied Captain Martinez, her tactical officer. Task Force Liberation has reached their staging area near the Hegemony Core systems. Task Force Defiance is positioned to strike Coalition supply depots in the Outer Rim. We're ready to begin Phase 1 operations on your command. Chen looked around the bridge at officers who had spent years preparing for this moment. Each one knew that the next few days would determine whether humanity survived as an independent species or became a cautionary tale about the dangers of defying galactic authority. Open fleet-wide communications, she ordered. The main screen activated, showing her image being broadcast simultaneously to every human military vessel in space. Thousands of crew members across dozens of star systems would receive her words as the official declaration that Earth's children were no longer asking permission to exist. This is Admiral Chen to all human forces. 3 months ago, we demonstrated that humanity possesses the technology and capability to defend ourselves against any threat. We offered partnership and cooperation to the galactic community, hoping to avoid the conflict that seemed inevitable once our true capabilities were revealed. She paused, letting her words sink in among crews who had volunteered to serve aboard ships that might not survive the coming battle. The Coalition has rejected our offer. Instead of accepting Earth as an equal partner, they have demanded our submission and threatened our extinction. Their fleets are moving into position to attack our worlds and destroy our civilization. They believe that overwhelming numbers will compensate for their technological disadvantages. The bridge of the Sovereignty was silent, except for the steady hum of systems that had been designed to survive anything the galaxy could throw at them. They are wrong. Humanity has spent 20 years preparing for this moment, developing not just advanced weapons and defensive systems, but entirely new approaches to warfare that render conventional military doctrine obsolete. Today, we will demonstrate what happens when a species that evolved on a death world decides to stop being polite. Chen stood from her command chair, her gray eyes reflecting the cold determination that had driven humanity from the stars. All ships implement Operation Starfall. Show the galaxy what Earth's children can do when survival is the only acceptable outcome. The human fleet dispersed with frightening efficiency. individual task forces jumping to hyperspace toward targets that had been selected months earlier. The Coalition had expected humanity to adopt defensive positions around Earth and their colonies, preparing to absorb the first wave of attacks before mounting a conventional counteroffensive. Instead, human forces scattered across the galaxy like seeds on cosmic winds, each group carrying enough firepower to cripple the military infrastructure of entire star systems. Task Force Liberation materialized in the heart of the Hegemony Prime system, where the Coalition maintained their largest naval base and primary fleet coordination center. Admiral Chen's carefully selected targets included the orbital shipyards that produced advanced starships, the communication arrays that coordinated multi-species military operations, and the command installations where Coalition strategists planned their campaigns. The battle was over before the defenders understood what was happening. Human ships phased through defensive perimeters, struck with weapons that bypassed conventional shielding, and vanished before return fire could be coordinated. In 17 minutes, the Coalition lost their primary naval base, 300 ships under construction, and the communication infrastructure that allowed them to coordinate operations across dozens of star systems. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as human task forces struck targets that had been considered impregnable. Supply depots that fed Coalition fleets suddenly erupted in carefully controlled explosions that destroyed stockpiled resources without harming civilian populations. Sensor networks that tracked ship movements throughout galactic space went dark as human infiltration teams activated programs that had been dormant in Coalition computer systems for years. Most devastating of all were the attacks on Coalition fleet formations that were moving into position to assault human colonies. Human forces emerged from hyperspace in the midst of enemy formations, disabled command ships with surgical precision, and left entire fleets stranded without leadership or coordination. Enemy vessels found themselves surrounded by ships that could appear and disappear at will, striking with weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. But the Coalition had numbers, and some of their commanders were skilled enough to adapt to unexpected circumstances. The battle for the Corvathian home system became a grinding engagement that lasted 6 hours and cost humanity 12 ships, their heaviest losses of the entire operation. The defense of the Crystalline Collective's industrial centers required human forces to fight through defensive minefields that had been designed to channel attackers into kill zones. Admiral Chen monitored the battle reports from the bridge of the Sovereignty as her flagship led the assault on Coalition Central Command at Centrum Prime. This was the heart of galactic governance, where the emergency session had taken place 3 months earlier. It was also the most heavily defended installation in known space. Defensive analysis, she asked as the human fleet approached the outer perimeter of the system. Impressive but conventional, Captain Martinez replied. Multiple orbital defense platforms, integrated sensor networks, approximately 200 warships from a dozen different species. They're coordinated and well-positioned, but they're using standard Coalition tactical doctrine. Which means they're fighting the last war instead of this one, Chen observed. Execute Formation 7. Let's show them what happens when humans stop pretending to be civilized. The human fleet split into 3 groups, each one approaching Centrum Prime from a different vector. As Coalition defenders moved to intercept, the human ships simply phased out of normal space, reappearing behind enemy lines in a coordinated pattern that left the defenders surrounded and disoriented. What followed was not so much a battle as a demonstration of technological superiority so complete that it redefined the possible. Human weapons that converted matter directly into energy carved through enemy shields like they didn't exist. Gravitational manipulation systems hurled enemy ships out of formation without damaging them. Dimensional phase technology allowed human vessels to attack from directions that shouldn't have existed in 3-dimensional space. Within 2 hours, the Coalition's most powerful defensive installation had been reduced to a collection of disabled platforms and drifting ships. The central government complex on Centrum Prime's surface remained intact, but its orbital defenses lay in ruins around it. "Signal from the surface," reported the communications officer. "High Chancellor Morthak is requesting immediate parley." Chen felt a grim satisfaction. The Coalition had dismissed humanity's diplomatic overtures 3 months ago, confident that their military superiority would allow them to dictate terms. Now, with their fleets scattered and their infrastructure crippled, they were ready to negotiate. Put him through. Let's hear what the great architect of galactic peace has to say now. High Chancellor Morthak's crystalline form appeared on the main screen, his usual prismatic brilliance dimmed by stress fractures that indicated extreme agitation. Behind him, the emergency command center on Centrum Prime showed signs of hasty evacuation and barely controlled panic. Admiral Chen, he began, his psychic emanations carrying undertones of defeat and desperate hope. The Coalition Council requests immediate cessation of hostilities and return to diplomatic negotiations. High Chancellor, Chen replied with the cold courtesy of someone who had tried diplomacy and been answered with threats of annihilation. Humanity attempted diplomatic solutions 3 months ago. Your response was a demand for our submission and preparations for coordinated military assault on our worlds. Why should we believe that your current request for negotiation is anything more than an attempt to buy time for regrouping? Because, Mortak admitted with the honesty of someone who had no alternatives left, your military demonstration has proven that continued conflict will result in the complete destruction of Coalition power. We underestimated human capabilities and overestimated our ability to control the situation through force. Chen looked around her bridge at officers who had spent years preparing for this moment. They had won the first phase of Operation Starfall, crippling Coalition military infrastructure and proving that human technology could overcome any numerical disadvantage. But she also knew that the galaxy was vast and that the Coalition could eventually mobilize resources that would overwhelm even humanity's technological advantages. The question was whether the galactic community had learned enough from this demonstration to accept Earth as an equal partner, or whether they would spend the next century building weapons designed specifically to counter human advantages. Humanity will consider a return to negotiations under the following conditions: complete cessation of all military preparations against human targets, recognition of Earth's sovereignty and expansion rights, and establishment of genuine equality within galactic governance structures. Any attempt to resume hostile actions will result in the complete implementation of Operation Starfall. And what does complete implementation involve? Mortak asked, though his stress pattern suggested he already suspected the answer. Chen smiled with the cold precision of someone who held the power to reshape galactic civilization and the will to use it if necessary. High Chancellor, you've seen what humanity can accomplish in 17 hours when we stop being diplomatic. Complete implementation would involve 6 months of systematic dismantling of every military asset and infrastructure installation that allows the Coalition to project power beyond individual home systems. By the time we finished, galactic civilization would be reduced to isolated worlds with no capacity for interstellar warfare. She paused, letting the implications settle. But we'd prefer not to take that step. Humanity didn't seek conflict, we sought recognition. If the galaxy can learn to treat Earth's children as equals rather than threats to be contained, we can build something better than what existed before. The transmission ended, leaving the Coalition leadership to contemplate a choice between partnership and destruction. In the depths of space, human fleets held position around the ruins of galactic military power, waiting to learn whether their demonstration had been enough to change minds that had been closed for centuries. The test of fire had begun. The only question now was whether the galaxy would emerge from it wiser or simply weaker. 1 year after the fires of Operation Starfall had swept across the galaxy, Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the observation lounge of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching ships from 43 different species moving through space in formations that would have been impossible before humanity forced the galaxy to confront its own limitations. The space around Earth's newest orbital platform bustled with traffic that represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Genuine cooperation between equals rather than submission to superior force. The past 12 months had transformed the political landscape of known space in ways that no one could have predicted. The Coalition's immediate response to humanity's demonstration had been exactly what Chen expected: desperate attempts to negotiate while secretly rebuilding military capabilities to counter human technological advantages. What she hadn't anticipated was how quickly other species would begin questioning why they had accepted subordinate roles in galactic civilization for so long. "Admiral," called Captain Rodriguez, Chen's new aide and the first human officer to serve aboard a mixed-species crew, "Ambassador Vasquez is requesting your presence in Conference Room 7. The Zenari delegation has arrived early for the treaty signing." Chen nodded and made her way through corridors that reflected the station's revolutionary design philosophy. Unity Station had been built through joint effort between human engineers and coalition architects, combining advanced human technology with the aesthetic preferences and functional requirements of dozens of different species. The result was a structure that felt alien and familiar simultaneously, a physical representation of what galactic civilization could become when species work together as equals. Conference Room 7 buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from the Galactic Reformation Council prepared for a ceremony that would officially end the old coalition and replace it with something that had never been attempted before. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the central podium, reviewing final details of agreements that had taken 6 months to negotiate and would reshape the relationships between every starfaring species in known space. "Admiral Chen," she said as Chen entered the room. "Perfect timing. I was just explaining to the Zenari delegation how the Mutual Defense Compact differs from previous coalition military arrangements. The Zenari were an insectoid species that had been one of the coalition's most enthusiastic supporters until human technology demonstrated that military supremacy could shift overnight. Their representative, Hive Speaker Zaishiv, clicked in patterns that indicated both curiosity and residual apprehension about humanity's role in the new galactic order. Admiral Chen, the translation system rendered her communication, "The Zenari Collective wishes to understand the human concept of proportional response within the Defense Compact framework. Your species demonstrated the ability to cripple galactic military infrastructure within hours. How do other species ensure that future conflicts do not result in similar respect?" Overwhelming demonstrations? Chen settled into her chair at the conference table, choosing her words carefully. The question reflected concerns that had dominated every negotiation session since the end of the crisis: how to maintain stability when one species possessed technology that could single-handedly determine the outcome of any military conflict. Hive Speaker Zash, the Mutual Defense Compact operates on the principle that all member species benefit more from cooperation than from conflict. Humanity's technological advantages are balanced by our relatively small population and limited territorial holdings. We need partners to fully develop and utilize the innovations we've created, while our partners benefit from access to technology that would take them centuries to develop independently. She activated the room's holographic display showing technological development timelines for various coalition species both before and after contact with human innovations. More importantly, the compact recognizes that military solutions should be the last resort rather than the first option. The old coalition maintained order through implied threats and displays of superior force. The Reformation Council resolves disputes through negotiation, arbitration, and economic cooperation. Zegdus Mandibles worked in patterns that indicated thoughtful consideration. And if negotiation fails, then the compact provides for graduated responses, starting with economic sanctions, progressing through limited military intervention, and culminating in the type of systematic action you witnessed last year. But every step requires majority approval from the Council, and any member species can request arbitration by neutral parties before military action is authorized. Ambassador Vasquez activated another section of the holographic display showing the new governmental structure that had emerged from months of careful negotiation. The Galactic Reformation Council replaced the old coalition hierarchy with a system based on rotating leadership, proportional representation, and technological contribution rather than military dominance. The key difference, Vasquez explained, is that the new system incentivizes innovation and cooperation rather than military buildup and territorial expansion. Species advance their standing through technological contribution, cultural exchange, and peaceful development. The arrival of the Etherian delegation interrupted the discussion, with High Chancellor Morthak entering the conference room accompanied by several junior representatives. The crystalline being's form had regained much of its earlier brilliance, though stress patterns from the previous year's crisis still flickered occasionally through his structure. Admiral Chen, Ambassador Vasquez, he projected in harmonics that carried cautious optimism. The Etherian hierarchy is prepared to ratify the Reformation Compact. Our psychic analysis indicates genuine commitment to peaceful cooperation among all participating species. Chen stood and offered the formal gesture of respect that humans had developed for psychic species, a slight bow with open hands that indicated honesty and peaceful intent. High Chancellor, I'm gratified that the Etherian hierarchy has chosen to participate in the new framework. Your species' abilities will be invaluable in resolving the kinds of disputes that led to last year's crisis. Indeed, Mortak replied, his harmonics shifting to include undertones of rueful acknowledgement. The hierarchy spent centuries believing that psychic mediation could prevent conflicts without addressing their underlying causes. Recent events demonstrated the limitations of that approach. The formal ceremony began an hour later in Unity Station's Grand Assembly Hall, a magnificent space that incorporated architectural elements from every participating species. Representatives from 43 civilizations gathered to sign documents that would govern their relationships for generations to come, while millions of beings across the galaxy watched through holographic transmission networks that had been jointly developed by human and coalition engineers. Admiral Chen found herself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment as she watched species after species formally commit to a new model of galactic civilization. The confrontation that had begun with a Corvathian fleet attempting to intimidate human merchants had escalated into a crisis that threatened to destroy everything the galaxy had built over millennia of careful political balance. But from the ashes of that near catastrophe had emerged something genuinely revolutionary, a system based on mutual benefit rather than military dominance, on technological sharing rather than hoarding advantages, on cooperation between equals rather than submission to superior force. The signing ceremony concluded with a joint declaration that would have seemed impossible just 1 year earlier. High Chancellor Mortok, Admiral Chen, and Prime Coordinator Yarseth of the Vorthan Empire stood together as representatives of the three most militarily powerful species in the galaxy, formally declaring their commitment to resolving future disputes through negotiation and their shared dedication to advancing galactic civilization through cooperative development. But the real test of the new system came 3 months later when the first major crisis under the Reformation Compact erupted in the Outer Rim territories. A dispute between the Crystalline Collective and the hegemony over mining rights in the Cathara system had escalated to the point where both species were mobilizing their fleets for what appeared to be inevitable conflict. Chen received the emergency notification while reviewing technological development proposals aboard the Sovereignty, which had been converted from a military command vessel into a mobile research platform. The ship's laboratories now housed joint research teams from a dozen species working together to develop innovations that no single civilization could have achieved alone. "Admiral, Captain Martinez reported from the bridge. We're receiving priority signals from the Reformation Council." The Cathara dispute has reached crisis stage. Both the Crystalline Collective and the Hegemony are requesting military support for their positions. Chen made her way to the communication center where Ambassador Vasquez was already coordinating with council representatives from across the galaxy. The crisis represented exactly the kind of territorial dispute that had historically led to devastating wars between equally matched species. "Status report," Chen requested as she joined the emergency session. "The situation is complex," Vasquez replied, displaying tactical analyses that showed both species had legitimate claims to the Cathara system's resources. The Crystalline Collective discovered the mineral deposits, but the hegemony had established a colonial presence in the system 50 years earlier. Both species need the resources for critical industrial processes, and neither can afford to abandon their claims. Under the old coalition system, this would have been resolved through military intervention by whichever species had the most powerful fleet in the region, observed Coordinator Yarseth from her command ship near Vorthen Space. The stronger side would have imposed a settlement that favored their interests while claiming to maintain galactic stability. Chen studied the data, looking for solutions that would satisfy both species without requiring the use of force. The Reformation Compact provided mechanisms for exactly this type of dispute, but this was the first test of whether those mechanisms could actually work under real-world pressure. What if we approach this as a technological challenge rather than a territorial dispute? She suggested. The Cathara minerals are valuable because they're necessary for specific industrial processes. Instead of fighting over who gets to extract them, why not work together to develop alternative processes that don't require those particular resources? The proposal sparked hours of intense negotiation as representatives from both species consulted with their home governments while human engineers provided preliminary assessments of technological alternatives. The breakthrough came when Crystalline Collective scientists offered to share their advanced metallurgy techniques in exchange for hegemony expertise in large-scale manufacturing processes. The result was a joint research initiative that not only resolved the territorial dispute but also produced innovations that both species could use to improve their industrial capabilities. Instead of fighting over limited resources, they had created new possibilities that made the original conflict irrelevant. 2 years later, Admiral Chen stood once again in Unity Station's observation lounge, watching the commencement ceremony for the Galactic Academy of Sciences, a joint educational institution that welcomed students from every member species of the Reformation Council. The Academy represented something that would have been unthinkable under the old coalition: genuine knowledge sharing between civilizations that had previously guarded their technological advantages as state secrets. "Admiral," called Dr. Sarah Kim, humanity's first director of interspecies research, "the latest innovation reports are ready for your review. The joint research initiatives are producing results faster than any of our projections indicated possible." Chen accepted the data pad and scrolled through achievements that read like science fiction. Collaborative teams had developed faster-than-light communication systems, matter conversion technologies that eliminated resource scarcity, and terraforming techniques that could transform barren worlds into garden paradises in decades rather than centuries. The Zanari biotechnology specialists have been particularly innovative, Dr. Kim continued enthusiastically. Their collaboration with human genetic engineers has produced medical treatments that can extend the lifespan of any known species by at least 30%. And the Vorthen strategic planning algorithms combined with our dimensional phase technology have resulted in transportation networks that can move cargo between any 2 points in the galaxy within hours instead of weeks. Chen smiled as she considered how completely the galaxy had been transformed. The crisis that had begun with Corvathian arrogance and human determination had ultimately produced a flowering of innovation and cooperation that benefited every participating species. The old system of competition and dominance had given way to collaboration and mutual advancement, but perhaps the most significant change was reflected in the ships moving through space around Unity Station. Human vessels flew alongside Corvathian destroyers, Ether. When a human ship decloaked, stardust and blood became the price of mistakes. Best HFY Stories.